I just want to go on record that I was ready to have my feet washed.
Yes, you were.
You could probably tell that we didn't know that was coming, so. If you've been to any leadership development training, you probably are familiar with what's called a personal mission statement. We know that organizations, both corporate and nonprofit, have mission statements. And if you're in leadership or you've worked on personal development in any way, you may have come across the opportunity to write your personal mission statement. That statement provides clarity and gives you a sense of purpose. It defines who you are and how you want to live. There's also another thing that has become popular, even though it's out of the Jewish tradition and they've been doing it for a couple centuries. It's called an ethical will. You may have heard of that. All of us are familiar with wills. This is an ethical will. An ethical will is a way to share your values, your blessings, your life lessons, your hopes and dreams for the future, and you share those with your beloveds. It's obviously not a legally binding document, but it is you saying, here's how I have hoped to live, and here's what I hope to pass on. You might also call it a legacy letter. This week, on Wednesday, at the age of 99, the Christian icon, Reverend Billy Graham, passed away, left this world assured of the heaven that he preached so often about. I grew up on Billy Graham. I grew up on his religion, his Christianity. I've been to his crusades. He was revered in my household and certainly in the church world that I was part of. Today, I am as far from his version of Christianity as you might imagine. In fact, I doubt that were he still living, he would not even consider me a Christian. David Hollinger, who's an emeritus history professor at UC Berkeley, wrote a thoughtful piece on the legacy that Graham left. We might call it his ethical will. Hollinger says, while scoring at the top of the list of most respected Americans and loved by millions, the parochial terms on which Mr. Graham preached Christianity render his career largely a story of missed opportunities. Now, why did he say that? Well, he said that because over the course, the long course of his ministry and career, Reverend Graham seldom spoke out, and when he did, it was with a very weak challenge to the prejudices and injustices of the day. Reverend Graham, as part of his personal mission statement, or at least shaped thereby, had an individualistic religion, a fundamentalist reading of the Bible. He neither offered nor encouraged an honest engagement with science. Hollinger compares Graham's version of evangelical Christianity to the liberal ecumenism, the liberal white Protestantism that runs parallel to that over the last half of the 20th century. He ends the article by this: the memory of Graham is rightly honored by those who shared his values and the goals for which he mobilized evangelical Christianity. But the rest of us, we can surely be forgiven if we remember him differently. So I would count myself among those who remember Billy Graham differently. His legacy is carried on by his son, Franklin Graham, who constantly makes statements and takes positions that I consider an anathema to the gospel of Jesus Christ. He's called Islam a wicked religion and done many other things. And while he is not his father, he is certainly carrying on in some way that legacy. I've no doubt that Billy Graham helped thousands of people. Absolutely. And I can be pretty sure of his personal mission statement. It was shaped by, for God so loved the world, John 3:16, that he gave his only begotten Son. Come on, Baptists, say it with me. That whosoever believed in him would... Oh boy, you just gave yourself away. Billy Graham's personal mission statement was to bring as many souls to Christ as possible. Now, I do not have any doubt that Billy Graham considered himself a follower of Jesus. And my question is, was that following in alignment with the life of Jesus and with his teachings? Now, it's easy to distance ourselves or to point the finger, but are we willing to ask our own selves, those of us who are part of the mainline liberal Protestant tradition, are we willing to ask our own selves that same question? We say, right in our mission statement here at CCSM, that we gather around the teachings of Jesus. I don't know that we actually say follow in our mission statement. Maybe we should, because gathering around and following are two different things, aren't they? You can gather around a lot of things and not do anything about it. But are we in alignment, individually and communally, with the life and teachings of Jesus? Are we inheritors and embodiers of the ethical will that Jesus left? I'm assuming you think that was a rhetorical question. The story that was read for us this morning is usually read on Holy Thursday or Maundy Thursday, and the word Maundy just means mandate or commandment. It's the time when Jesus, knowing that his end was near, gave his disciples his last ethical will and testament. Love one another as I have loved you. And what I want to put forth today is that I think that this text that was read was the embodiment of Jesus' ethical will, the legacy that he wanted to give to all those who would choose to follow his teachings. The method was the message. The foot washing was not an act of hygiene, it was an act of ritual. This story is found only in the Gospel of John, which has no Eucharist and no baptism. Those are all found in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, which are the synoptic Gospels. John's Gospel is very different. John has a personal mission statement, which is to show the divinity and exaltation of Jesus the Christ in his view. So what was this context? Because clearly, this is not something that we do, right? It's not a ritual of our church, is it? So what was the context? Well, in those days, as you heard from Kibby already, people were invited to a meal, and after walking dusty roads, they were greeted by somebody at the door with a basin and a towel to wash hands and feet of the guests. Now, the person was fundamentally a part of the meal, though never ate with the guest. So when Jesus gets up, wraps his waist with a towel, and kneels down with the water, his disciples are shocked because Jesus was doing the work of an insignificant slave. And by doing this, he was completely disrupting and upending the social order of the day. With me so far? I mean, they were shocked. This just didn't happen. Now, Jesus was actually mirroring what Mary of Bethany had done to him days before, when she poured water on his feet and washed his feet with her hair. That story, which was a scandalous act. And I want to suggest today that her extravagant love moved Jesus so deeply. And as he's received that love, he decided to carry on that example and to show that love in that particular way with his disciples. And it was as scandalous then as it was when Mary did it. Why? Because the world is tightly ordered. It's structured by domination and power and hierarchy, and foot washing revealed that very order. The lower class washed the upper class feet. Now, somebody said it like this: those who have power and wealth are the washed, those who don't are the washers. Pretty simple, right? Pretty much like our society today. The act might be different, but we are as stratified class-wise as any society there is. We're just a little more sophisticated in the way that we exhibit it. Are you with me? Yes. Am I out here on a limb, or am I going in the right direction? Okay. I'm glad you said that, because if you said no, I don't know where I would go with my sermon after this. So Peter, of course, being Peter, says, "No, Lord, you're not going to wash me. And Jesus said, "Look, if I don't wash you, you don't have any part of me. If you can't receive this, you're not going to be part of this thing that I'm about." So then Peter, being Peter, of course, says, "Oh, yes, all of me. Don't wash just my feet then." At the end of it all, Jesus says, "Do you know what I have done to you?" It's a teaching moment. So what does it mean actually to do this? What is this ethical will that Jesus is embodying? Well, I think it's really twofold. It's how we serve and how we love. And how we serve and how we love have everything to do with who we see. It's all wrapped in together. A willingness to serve. It's not that highly rated in our society. In fact, if you've written a CV lately or a resume, I doubt that in your little personal mission statement at the top about the skills that you bring forward, you probably didn't say ready to do anything that is needed, no task too menial, eager to serve. It's not how the way the world works. And vulnerability, either of serving or of being served, as we saw illustrated so awkwardly this morning in the children's time. Are we willing to make ourselves vulnerable? Because vulnerability is also a quality or attribute not highly praised in our society. At the end of the day, probably it's mostly about adjusting our relationship to power, our own and others. Because when you distill most things down in life, whether it's in intimate relationships or communal relationships or governmental relationships, it's about power. Is it not? So adjusting that relationship to power is something that Jesus was talking about. What is your identity and status? Is it about someone in power, or is it about service? And if you think about it, many of our most exalted role models actually are people who have been willing to serve, give their life in service to others. It's what we admire, many of us. And this is kind of what Jesus wanted to get across. Knowing that he was near the end of his life, he desperately wanted to communicate this. He wanted to show his followers, those he loved, in a very real and tangible way, what it meant to break down social barriers, to serve one another, to realize that no feet were excluded from love. I think this is really difficult for us. And if you can hear me for just a minute, I think it's difficult in different ways, in general, for women and for men. Now I got your attention, okay. I think it's difficult for women, not as much so now, perhaps. I think it's difficult for women because we are often under the expectation that we should serve, right? I notice all the women in the room saying right and the men not saying a whole lot at this moment. So I think we have to think about it a little differently. What does that mean? Do I have intention when I serve, or am I just conditioned to try to always help? Again, these are broad generalizations. I think for men, it's different. I obviously can't speak to your experience, but I was struck by an article in the New York Times this week. It's the second time I had heard this, by Michael Ian Black. The article was, "The Boys Are Not All Right." He was writing this, particularly in the context of the numerous school shootings that have happened, and that has been boys. He said this. He said, "The past 50 years have redefined what it means to be female in America. Girls today are told that they can do anything and be anyone, and they've absorbed the message. To be a girl today is to be the beneficiary of decades of conversation about the complexities of womanhood, its many forms and expressions." I think that's right. For those of us that have daughters, the way they look at the world, vastly different than those of us who grew up a number of decades ago, shall we say. Now, boys, however, he says, have been left behind. No commensurate movement has emerged to help them navigate toward a full expression of their gender. It is no longer enough to, quote, be a man. We no longer even know what that means. Men, are you with me? Semi, all right. Too many boys are trapped in the same suffocating, outdated model of masculinity, where manhood is measured in strength, where there is no way to be vulnerable without being emasculated, where manliness is about having power over others. They are trapped, and they don't even have the language to talk about how they feel about being trapped, because the language that exists to discuss the full range of human emotion is still viewed as sensitive and feminine. He says this, "There has to be a way to expand what it means to be a man without losing our masculinity, to be open to the complexities of manhood." I think that, and Jorge and I have been talking about this, and actually we've decided in a couple weeks to preach about this together. To preach about how we embody gender today in our own particular expressions, and our journeys about learning what it is to be a man, learning what it is to be a woman, and be a follower of Jesus and a person who seeks love and justice in the world. We're hoping that will open up conversations among us and between us. And I want to suggest that Jesus, though, exhibited the complexities of manhood. When you think about his life, he had power in a particular kind of way, power over all kinds of crowds. People couldn't wait to be near him. He exhibited vulnerability, certainly strength, leadership, compassion, empathy. His manhood in that society was not doubted. And yet he exhibited the full complexities of what it is to be human, the integration of the masculine and feminine in his male body. He wasn't afraid to serve. He wasn't afraid to get down on his knees to those who were his students and wash their feet. And he saw people. Remember the person at the door that washed the feet when they came in, but was not a part of the meal, actually? It's like our society, where the poor, the undocumented, the marginalized are the ones who harvest our food, clean our houses, mow our lawns, mow our golf courses, who do all the hidden services of society so that we can have things that make our lives happen, but we often don't see them. Jesus was kneeling, washing their feet. They look down and they see his face. And maybe that was the whole point. That class-wise, wherever you are, when we look down, we are to see the face of Jesus. And things then begin to be upended. Change begins to happen. We begin to see in new ways, because what Jesus was offering was not a new way to wash somebody's feet. It was simply a new way of being in the world. Because as Rebecca Parker says, we must answer this question: what will we do with our gifts? What kind of ethical will we write? What kind of legacy will we leave? How will we live, and who do we want to be? Because with these hands, this mind, we can serve or we can dominate. We can love or ignore. And it's a choice that we make. And why we come together as spiritual community is to encourage each other to enter a way of being where we serve and when we really see each other and those around us. Amen.